And we talk a lot about the big issues for this coming elections: the economy, inflation, open border, abortion, crime, foreign affairs. But what we don't hear much is something that, well, it ought to be right up there at the top of the list. And that's how the Department of Justice, the FBI, and other authorities have been increasingly the source of political action. And it has no bearing on what they're supposed to do. It's called the weaponization of government. And it's something that much of the country hears very little about because most often it's something the Democrats have been doing, and quite frankly, they've been doing it quite well. Since the media has a habit of giving Democrats a free pass, you don't hear what's really going on unless you know exactly where to look. Remember the bold attempt going after former President Trump to collect documents that he brought from the White House to Florida? Guns drawn, friendly media alerted so they could show it live. A far bigger attack on papers in a box than federal authorities showed when a real gunman tried to assassinate Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. Sad, but very true. And in the end, after months of having to pay some very expensive lawyers, the court ruled that there was no case to be made and that the prosecutor wasn't even in a position to be named to the job that he'd been appointed to. Remember the mess? Well, compare it to some boxed documents that Joe Biden took and stored next to his Corvette at his vacation home in Delaware. He took the classified documents home even when he wasn't president, which means he wasn't supposed to be able to have possession of them. But when that case went before a judge, the ruling was that Mr. Biden has memory problems. He was unable to answer the things that he was being asked, likely because of his age. So, nothing to see here. Case dismissed. No guns drawn, no live breaking news on CNN. Nope. No media excitement. It just quietly went away. I'm sure you get the point. And with these two cases making for extraordinary example of how prosecution tools are being used again and again for strictly political reasons, I dare say that we surely don't even know the depth of the problem yet. And one other point. If it can happen to one of the most powerful men in the world, a former president, you better believe it most certainly can happen to you and me. And if we don't stop it, sure enough, it will. Which brings us to a most important topic and guest for the evening. He's former U.S. Attorney and my chief legal counsel when I served as governor of Arkansas. Bud Cummins, welcome to the show. Great to have you with us today.
It's great to be here, Governor. I'm excited about this format that you're adding on. I think it's going to be great for your followers, since you disseminate more news and facts than almost any other source of information out there.
Well, I'm hoping that all my followers will enjoy the show, and so far both of them say they really, really like it. So let's hope it continues. Bud, you and I have been friends a long time. We've worked together in the governor's office, and then I've watched you as the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Arkansas in that role, now private practice attorney. But I want to start with the case that we discussed at the very beginning of the program, and that's the documents case of President Trump, where federal agents early in the morning went to his home and went through all of his belongings with all the FBI present, guns drawn, at a former president's home over some paper that is in dispute as to whether or not it was even improper for him to have it. As a former U.S. attorney, give a perspective. Is that something that you were shocked by, that they would blast into a former president's home, even going through his wife's closets and looking at her clothing because they thought he might have some documents in his storage?
I thought it was heavy-handed. I do know that, you will recall that President Trump was not necessarily cooperative with voluntarily producing maybe all the documents he had. In a typical setting, that would justify the ratcheting up of the application of force and what have you, search warrants. But you got to remember, let's cut President Trump a little slack. The people that he didn't trust to deal with were the same people that had run a 2-year Russian collusion investigation against him that we now know was completely faked, completely false, and they knew or should have known entire time. So they plagued a presidential administration, really most of his first administration. And so personally, I cut him a little slack if he didn't trust the FBI and those authorities with full cooperation.
There's an important case you and I have spent a lot of time talking about, and you're representing the family on a case involving the ATF taking the life of the Little Rock, Arkansas airport manager early in the morning at his home. I want us to get into that. I think it's one of the most important cases people in America need to know about. We're going to talk about that with former U.S. Attorney Bud Cummins when we return. Stay tuned. You know, the economy is uncertain. You never know whether your money's worth as much today as it was yesterday. It's one of the reasons I buy gold from American Hartford Gold. American Hartford Gold has earned a 5-star rating and an A+ from the Better Business Bureau. Be sure to tell them Mike Huckabee sent you. They'll give you up to $15,000 of free silver on your first qualifying order. Call 844-417-1010 or text Mike to 998899. You'll be glad you did business with American Hartford Gold. I want us to get into a case that I mentioned just before we went to the break. It was the case of former Little Rock Airport manager Brian Malinowski. The ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, went to his home at 6 a.m. to serve a search warrant. It did not end well. Bud, set up the case for us, remind us, and give us the steps of what happened and why they were at his home.
Well, Brian Malinowski, married 25, was the executive director of the Little Rock Airport, was very successful, highest paid city employee in Little Rock. He was a coin collector. He had collection enthusiasm. He was a lifelong coin collector, and he was the type of guy that would really research every detail about coins and loved to talk about them. He researched at one point in his life card playing and analyzed it, mathematically. He just had a mind like that. Well, a few years ago, his father gave him a collection of firearms that he had, and that led to Brian becoming interested in firearms. He became a collector. He read arms, and eventually he found out that, that he liked to trade, buy, sell, and trade firearms with other enthusiasts, and he would frequently attend gun shows and set up a table and put out his coins and put out his guns. Now, this was what he did on occasional weekends. He had a full-time job as the executive director, making over $250,000 a year at gun shows. There is as we all know, when stores or if someone sells firearms for a living, you have to have a federal firearms license. That means when I sell you a gun, you have to fill out a form. There's a background check. We've all heard about that. But there is an exception to that for private citizens who are collectors, who are hobbyists, and they are not required to get a federal firearms license. Brian believed he fell into that exception. I will defy you to put the rule that defines that exception in front of 10 educated people and get 3 of them to explain it to you, their understanding of it the same. It's a completely arbitrary and ununderstandable rule. And so at some point, ATF locally decided that they had seen Brian Malinowski at gun shows, and they believed he had crossed this arbitrary line. I can't even tell you this minute why they believed that, but that he was required to purchase a $200 federal firearms license. Well, maybe that was the case. You would expect, just based as I've described that might result in a harshly worded letter or a phone call from a bureaucrat that said you need to buy a license or you're going to face a fine. But what Brian Malinowski faced was the ATF tailed him around the city. They put a tracker on his vehicle, and then they obtained a federal search warrant, which they executed. Well, they came to execute it at 6 a.m. on one morning. It was a search warrant, not an arrest warrant. But they found out Brian wasn't home. He'd left already for the airport for a business trip. So they shut the whole thing down, came back a week later, executed at 6 in the morning. Now, this is on March 19th. It's over an hour before sunrise. It's 32 degrees. They went to his door. They knocked on an exterior insulated glass door outside his front door, we think for as little as 8 seconds, and then proceeded to enter his home with force, prying open the glass doors, battering open the doors. Brian and his wife heard an intrusion. He grabbed a pistol, came around the corner, and faced a dark figure in his front hallway, shot at his feet, and they shot Brian in the head. And he actually lived technically for a day or two, but it was massive traumatic injury to his brain, and it killed him. So here's a person in his own home, taxpayer, a highly respected person in the community who ATF believes has violated this low-level regulation, which is, though, highly important to gun control advocates. It's, if you go to their websites, that they call it the gun show loophole, and they think it's a very serious matter. ATF refers to people like Brian as gun traffickers, but he was a weekend hobbyist, and now he's dead. ATF treated the case with that approach.
I'm grateful that you're representing them. I want to keep just checking back in with you from time to time. I want this case to be followed. I do not want it to be swept under the rug and forgotten. So, Bud, expect a call that we want you to come back as developments happen in this case. But we're grateful for you giving us some light on what has been truly an outrageous case.